pounding of waves usually lulled me to sleep, but this morning it jolted me awake. A dull, roaring sound, angry and mechanical, echoed along the coastline. I threw on a pair of jeans, pulled on a sweatshirt, and sprinted outside toward the strip of white sand that had belonged to my family for generations. To my horror, I saw bulldozers gouging deep trenches into the dunes. Trucks loaded with steel beams were parked in neat rows, and a swarm of hard-headed workers paced across the sand like ants on a mission. In the center of it all stood a single woman, tall, poised, and unmistakably in charge. My name is Robert Callahan. I'm an attorney for the state of California. Not just any attorney. Some call me the Bulldog for my tenacity in prosecuting corporate polluters and land grabbers. Still, I never imagined I'd be defending my own land from an assault that looked like a corporate raid. I approached the woman, stepping over broken bits of driftwood flung aside by the heavy machinery. "What do you think you're doing?" I demanded, heart hammering. She flicked her gaze my way, expression cool behind designer sunglasses. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I growled, gesturing at the dig site. "This is private property. I'm Robert Callahan, the legal owner of this coastal sanctuary. I have every right to know why you've got construction crews tearing it up." She removed her sunglasses and offered a patronizing smile. "Valerie Wynn, Director of Coastal Development for the Seaside Grove HOA. We have lawful permits to construct 60 luxury villas here, courtesy of the county's new rezoning plan." My stomach dropped. "That's impossible. There were no public notices, no environmental studies." Valerie gave a small shrug. "All the necessary paperwork was filed and approved. If you want the details, I suggest you contact the county records office." She turned away, already barking orders to a nearby foreman. The bulldozers resumed their deafening roar, and I stood there, sand whipping at my ankles. Anger pulsed through my veins. I had spent years protecting other people's land from illegal dumping, shady zoning deals, and unscrupulous developers. Now, the battle had come to my doorstep. They'd picked the wrong coastal sanctuary and the wrong person to bulldoze. My late grandfather, James Callahan Sr., had bought this stretch of coastline back in the 1950s. At that time, nobody saw much value in remote dunes and windswept cliffs. But my grandfather adored the majestic ocean view and the secluded coves perfect for wildlife. Over the decades, he diligently protected it from speculators. I inherited it after my father passed. For me, it was more than just real estate. It was a family heirloom, a living testament to the Callahan legacy of environmental stewardship. Turtles nested in the dunes each spring. Migrating birds used the coastline as a rest stop. My family's small beach house sat nestled on a cliffside, half hidden by Monterey pines, offering a sweeping view of the Pacific. Now, that idyllic view was ruined by towering construction equipment. 60 villas, an entire complex, were about to reshape the fragile dune ecosystem. Something about it all felt illegal, or at least deeply unethical. But the mere suspicion wasn't enough. I needed solid proof. That afternoon, I drove to the county records office, located in a nondescript building off Highway 1. The small parking lot was nearly full. I spotted a few large SUVs, likely belonging to contractors or developers. Inside, the stale air smelled of old paper and disinfectant. A harried clerk named Patricia greeted me with a curt nod. When I mentioned the rezoning, she winced. I'm not sure we have those files on hand," she stammered. I smiled politely, but my tone was firm. "I'll wait." She vanished into a back room, leaving me in the cramped waiting area. My phone buzzed with emails from the state attorney's office about an upcoming environmental case, I couldn't focus on that now. I had to figure out how the Seaside Grove HOA had wormed its way onto my private land. Patricia returned, clutching a thin folder. "This is all I found," she mumbled. "It's not much." I flipped through the documents. They were suspiciously minimal. One stamped form read, "Approved for Coastal Residential Development, Seaside Grove, HOA," dated just 3 weeks prior. Another contained a vague reference to a public hearing that apparently took place while I was out of town on business. No public notices or environmental impact assessments were attached. My legal instincts screamed that something was off. The layers of bureaucracy were typically thick, especially for coastal land. Obtaining a permit to build even a single house near sensitive dunes often took months, sometimes years of scrutiny. Yet somehow, this HOA had breezed through the process in mere weeks. I pressed Patricia for more information. She shrugged helplessly. "I've heard rumors, connections with the county board, maybe some hush-hush deals, but I don't know details, Mr. Callahan." Leaving the records office, I felt a cold determination settle in my chest. If these permits were indeed fraudulent, I had more than enough clout to challenge them. But I'd need help and irrefutable evidence. So I pulled up to the old beach house on the bluff. My mother, who visited occasionally, was already there, having seen the construction from the road. The lines on her face deepened with worry. "Robert, what on earth is happening?" she asked, voice trembling. "They're tearing up your grandfather's land." I exhaled slowly. "I'm going to stop them, Mom. But it seems like they have the county in their pocket." Her eyes glistened. "I know you'll do what's right. Your father was always so proud of your passion for justice." I nodded, thankful for her support. Then I called an old friend, Laura Pike, a local environmental attorney who specialized in coastal regulations. If anyone knew how to challenge suspicious permits, it was Laura. She picked up on the second ring. "Rob, I heard rumblings about this new development," she said, her voice tinged with anger. "I can't believe they're building on your land. Are you sure you never sold?" "Never," I assured her. "I'd sooner burn my deed than give it to a greedy HOA." Laura sighed. "I'll look into the Coastal Commission records. If they used any public grants or special funds, there should be a paper trail." "Thanks, Laura, I appreciate it." After hanging up, I gazed out the window. The Pacific shimmered in the distance. Gulls swooped in the salty air. I breathed in the brine, trying to calm myself. Soon, I'd turn this anger into a legal barrage the HOA would never see coming. But first, I needed to see how deep the rot went. Seaside Grove HOA was well known for building exclusive enclaves in scenic spots up and down the coast. I suspected they had powerful backers. Maybe wealthy investors, maybe a local official wanting kickbacks. The next day, I headed into Sacramento, where my office was in the State Justice Building. My assistant Trina greeted me with a stack of urgent messages and a worried frown. "Mr. Callahan, your calendar is packed, but I hear you've got a personal crisis." I gave her a rueful smile. Crisis is an understatement. "A rogue HOA is constructing on my private beach. I'll need every spare minute to investigate." Trina nodded, her eyes flashing with concern. "Do you want me to reach out to the district attorney's office or the local court?" "Not yet," I said. "First, I have to gather my own intel, but keep your ear to the ground. Let me know if you hear anything about Seaside Grove." "Will do," Trina replied. Sinking into my leather chair, I fired up my computer. My desk was cluttered with case files, oil spill lawsuits, industrial waste prosecutions, but my focus was locked on the assault against my sanctuary. The stakes were personal now, and the deeper I dug, the more I sensed that Valerie Nguyen and her HOA weren't just another real estate operation. Something more insidious lurked beneath their facade of community development. 3 days later, I returned to the site, hoping to gather photographic evidence. The dunes were even more ravaged. Large concrete slabs poured for foundations of future villas. Groups of workers hammered away, erecting wooden frames. I was snapping pictures when a voice behind me said, "We have a no trespassing policy here, Mr. Callahan." I turned to see Valerie, arms folded, her eyes cold. "Funny," I retorted, "since you're the trespassers on my land." She let out a short laugh. "These acres are now under the Seaside Grove HOA's jurisdiction. We have signed contracts from the county. My team is quite thorough." I eyed the lines of bulldozers, the scaffolding. "I've seen your so-called permits. They're questionable at best. You're going to find yourself in a legal quagmire." Valerie shrugged, but I caught a flicker of tension in her posture. "This development is bigger than you. We have wealthy backers who want ocean views. It's about progress. Progress at the expense of endangered wildlife, fragile dunes, and my rightful property?" I snapped, anger rising. "You're building on a protected coastline. There's a reason these laws exist. If you're ignoring them, I'll make sure you face the consequences." Valerie's smile faded. Her voice dropped to a warning tone. "Be careful, Mr. Callahan. You might be the state's attorney, but we have connections in the local government. You can't bulldoze decades of community planning because you disagree with it." I stood my ground. "Watch me," I said quietly. "No one is above the law." For a moment, we locked eyes. Then she turned on her heel, returning to the cluster of project managers who awaited her direction. My heart pounded from the confrontation, but I felt a grim sense of resolve. Valerie had just shown her hand, hinting at her alliances. Well, I had my own alliances and a legal arsenal that could tear their phony deals apart. Back in my office, I pored over the limited paperwork I had, cross-refreshing it with the official county regulations. A pattern emerged. The signatures granting the HOA development rights all converged on one name: County Supervisor Todd Parker. Supervisor Parker was known for championing business-friendly policies. I'd once heard rumors that certain developers slid money under the table to expedite permits. Now, it seemed Parker might be the hidden linchpin that allowed Valerie's project to steamroll through. I called in a favor with a contact in the state auditor's office, someone I'd worked with on a previous corruption case. "Hey, Mark," I said, my voice hushed. "I need to see if there's any suspicious financial activity linked to Supervisor Parker or the Seaside Grove HOA." Mark sighed. "That's a tall order. Government officials' finances are notoriously obscure." "I know," I conceded, "but if there's a leak or a whistleblower, you'd be the first to hear. Let me know if anything surfaces." As I hung up, my mind buzzed with possibilities. It wasn't enough to suspect corruption. I needed concrete evidence, bank statements, emails, or insider testimony. That afternoon, Laura Pike called with her findings on the environmental front. "Rob, I checked with the Coastal Commission. No official permits have been granted for such a massive project. The commission was bypassed entirely." That revelation made my blood boil. Then how are they claiming to have state approval? "They're not," Laura clarified. "They're only citing county-level approvals, but that's illegal for large-scale developments in ecologically sensitive areas. They can't just bypass the commission." I felt a surge of hope. If the HOA had circumvented the Coastal Commission, that alone could invalidate their entire operation. "We'll use that," I said. "We'll file an injunction, demand a cease and desist, until a proper review is done. Exactly, Laura agreed, though I suspect they'll fight back. Let me know if you need me to represent you in the filing. I'm well versed in coastal law. Count on it, I said, exhaling in relief. Thanks, Laura. That night, I slept a bit easier, confident that a legal path existed to halt the construction. The next morning, however, I woke to a frantic phone call from my mother, who had stayed at the beach house. Robert, she whispered, her voice shaking. There are men prowling around the property. They say they're from the HOA security team, but they're scaring me. My heart thumped. Are you safe? Lock the doors. I'll be there as soon as I can. I drove like a madman along the coastal highway. Sure enough, I arrived to find two uniformed security guards patrolling outside my beach house, their truck emblazoned with the HOA's logo. They claimed they were protecting the site. From what? I demanded, outraged. From an elderly woman? They avoided my gaze, muttering about trespassers and vandalism. I promptly instructed them to leave my property, threatened them with trespassing charges if they remained. They hesitated, but once I mentioned my position as the state's attorney, they backed off. My mother hugged me, tears in her eyes. It's all so unsettling, Robert. They act like they own the place. I clenched my jaw. Don't worry. They won't get away with this. In that moment, a flicker of doubt crossed my mind. The HOA was brazen enough to send security to harass my family. What else were they capable of? Word spread quickly among the local community that the Seaside Grove HOA was apparently building a private enclave on a prime coastal spot. Some folks cheered for new jobs and tourism potential. Others, especially longtime residents, were furious at the disruption to wildlife and the potential loss of public beach access. Meanwhile, local news stations started sniffing around. A reporter named Maria Perez reached out to me, requesting an interview. I agreed, hoping to shine a spotlight on the HOA's questionable tactics. Under a crisp morning sun, we stood near the construction site. Maria's camera operator filmed the background: bulldozers, scaffolding, and the relentless hum of heavy machinery. Maria turned to me. Mr. Callahan, you're a well-respected figure in the state's attorney office. Can you tell us why you believe the Seaside Grove HOA's project here is unlawful? I took a breath. They claim county approval, but they bypassed the Coastal Commission. This is a fragile dune ecosystem that requires extensive environmental review. Furthermore, they appear to be building on property that's still legally mine. It seems there's been either fraud or corruption in the permit process. We plan to challenge it in court. Maria nodded, then motioned behind her. The HOA states they're revitalizing unused land, generating economic growth. What's your response to those who say this project will benefit the community? Any development has to follow the law, I answered, voice firm. If they want to build, they need legitimate approval and must respect private property rights. Bulldozing protected coastline and ignoring rightful ownership is not revitalization. It's vandalism. Maria ended the interview with a standard sign-off, the sea breeze ruffling her hair. As the camera went dark, she lowered her voice. Thank you for talking with us, Mr. Callahan. We've heard rumors that local officials might be on the HOA's side. Any comment? I sighed, choosing my words carefully. We suspect impropriety, but I have no hard proof yet. Let's just say we're digging. She gave me a sympathetic nod. Best of luck. People around here value the coast. I'm sure they'll support you if you can prove wrongdoing. That evening, the news segment aired, painting a stark contrast between my family's conservation legacy and the HOA's flashy development. Public opinion began to sway. The next morning, I found supportive letters in my mailbox, urging me to keep fighting, but I also received a few threatening emails, accusing me of standing in the way of progress. Among them was a short note from an anonymous sender. "Stop snooping, or you'll regret it." A chill rippled through me. They were getting desperate. Good. Desperate adversaries tend to make mistakes. Laura and I filed an emergency motion in the Superior Court, seeking an immediate cease and desist order. The hearing was scheduled 2 weeks away, an eternity, given how quickly the HOA worked. Every day, they raised more wooden frames, poured more concrete. Still, it was our best shot. I spent every spare minute preparing the case, sifting through county records, cross-checking real estate transactions. Laura uncovered a piece of intriguing intel. The HOA had purchased a narrow adjacent parcel from a shell company, which might be the wedge they used to claim adjacency or partial ownership, but there were glaring discrepancies in the boundary lines. Late one night, while combing through digital archives, I discovered that an old boundary marker had been suspiciously moved, on paper at least. The shift effectively placed the entire dune system within the HOA's coastal expansion zone. My father's name was nowhere on the updated document, which made no sense because we never relinquished that portion of the land. I shot up from my chair, heart hammering. This was likely a forged or doctored record. If I could prove it, their entire justification would crumble. However, proving forgery requires expertise. I reached out to a forensic document analyst, an older gentleman named Dr. Harold Kim, who specialized in land records. He agreed to examine the boundary documents and would meet me a few days before our hearing. In the meantime, Supervisor Parker publicly defended the HOA on local radio. "This development is a boon to our county," he declared. "Folks who oppose it are stuck in the past, ignoring the economic benefits." His words fueled suspicion about a corrupt alliance between Parker and Valerie. The local press latched onto it, raising tough questions. Parker dodged them skillfully, claiming everything was by the book. But a twist occurred that same week. The Coastal Commission announced they were reviewing an anonymous complaint, likely Laura's doing, and would be sending representatives to inspect the site. The HOA scrambled, trying to stall. Suddenly, I received a polite request from one of Valerie's associates for a private meeting, presumably to discuss amicable resolutions. I almost laughed. They were feeling the heat, but I agreed to meet, on my terms, at a neutral location. My curiosity was piqued. What would they offer me in exchange for backing off? We met at a cafe near the courthouse. Myself, Valerie Nguyen, and a man introduced as James Colton, who identified himself as an HOA legal advisor. The cafe was bustling with midday customers. The hum of conversation provided a veneer of privacy. Valerie started with small talk, but I cut her off. "Let's skip the pleasantries. Why did you ask for this meeting?" James cleared his throat. "Mr. Callahan, the Seaside Grove HOA acknowledges there may have been oversights in how we acquired certain land parcels. We'd like to see if we can settle out of court." I raised an eyebrow. "Oversights? You bulldozed my dunes and built part of your villas on land that belongs to me." Valerie exhaled sharply. "Look, we can't turn back time, but we could purchase the entire property from you at a fair price. Name your figure, we can negotiate something beneficial for all." My stomach churned. They were trying to buy me out. "This land isn't for sale. It's a sanctuary, not a commodity." Valerie's eyes hardened. "You're a lawyer. You understand real-world compromises. The HOA has already sunk millions into development. If you continue to fight, it'll be a drawn-out legal battle that could take years. You might win eventually, or you might lose. In the meantime, your land remains torn up. Is that what you want? I clenched my fists under the table. The nerve of her to exploit the damage they caused as leverage. James placed a folded piece of paper in front of me. "This is our preliminary offer," he said. "It's quite generous." I glanced at the number. Well into 8 figures. Enough to buy a mansion in any city I wanted. Enough to retire comfortably. But not enough to erase the decades of my family's commitment to preserving this coastline. I slid the paper back, not interested. Valerie's jaw tightened. She forced a smile. "Don't be rash, Mr. Callahan. Even if you are the state's attorney, this project has powerful supporters. Supervisor Parker, certain donors, they all stand behind Seaside Grove. You'll be making more enemies than you can handle." I leaned forward, letting my voice drop. I've prosecuted crooked corporations, cleaned up toxic spills, and put away men who thought they were untouchable. Trust me, you do not scare me. Valerie's cheeks flushed. James frowned, but tried a conciliatory tone. "This is a business proposition, nothing personal." I rose from my seat, ignoring the stares of nearby patrons. "It became personal the moment you bulldozed my family's dunes. See you in court." With that, I walked out, my pulse pounding. Their desperation was evident, but so was their audacity, and probably their willingness to escalate. I had to stay vigilant. A few nights later, my phone buzzed just after midnight. The number was unknown. I almost ignored it, but a nagging feeling made me pick up. A distorted voice crackled through the line. "Mr. Callahan?" I frowned. "Yes. Who is this?" "I can't say. I've seen the bribery. Supervisor Parker is in deep with the HOA. Documents, wire transfers. Check the city clerk's archive, drawer 22B, file labeled Shoreline Investments. Hurry!" Then the line went dead. Adrenaline surged. This had to be an insider tip. Someone who worked in the county offices, risking exposure to give me a lead. Part of me wondered if it was a trap, but my gut told me it was genuine. By 8 a.m., I was in my car, heading to the county offices. The building was open for business, but the archive rooms were typically deserted. I slipped past a bored security guard and found the dusty corridor labeled Archived Transactions. Drawer 22B was half jammed. After some yanking, it slid open. Inside were random files, but near the back, I found a thin folder marked Shoreline Investments. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. Bank statements indicated that Shoreline Investments, LLC, had wired large sums to a personal account belonging to Todd Parker, tens of thousands of dollars labeled as consulting fees. The timeline coincided perfectly with the rushed rezoning approvals for the Seaside Grove development. I nearly laughed out loud at the brazenness. Parker had essentially left a paper trail of corruption. This was the smoking gun I'd been praying for. I snapped photos of every page with my phone, then carefully replaced the file. I debated taking the folder altogether, but that might raise suspicion. Instead, I'd rely on the digital copies, which I promptly sent to Laura and to my private cloud. If Parker tried to destroy the evidence, I'd still have backups. Leaving the building, my heart pounded with triumph. This was more than enough to launch a corruption probe and potentially void every permit Parker had signed off on. The question now was how to use it most effectively in the upcoming hearing. The day of the court hearing arrived, the atmosphere crackling with tension. A crowd gathered outside the Superior Court in Redwood Bay, with local news crews capturing the scene. Protesters held signs reading, "Save our beaches," and "Stop the corruption." Inside, the wooden benches were packed. On one side sat Laura and me, supported by a few local activists. On the other side, Valerie Wynn, James Colton, and an army of attorneys representing Seaside Grove HOA. Judge Martinez, a stern woman with sharp eyes, presided. First, Laura presented evidence that the HOA bypassed the Coastal Commission. Then she showcased the questionable boundary documents. Dr. Harold Kim, the forensic analyst, testified that the digital metadata on the updated boundary lines didn't match the date stamps. Valerie's lawyers squirmed. They tried to shift blame to the county's record-keeping, but the judge didn't seem convinced. Next, we presented the bombshell. Wire transfers from Shoreline Investments, LLC, to Todd Parker's personal account. I explained how Parker had expedited the rezoning for Seaside Grove, ignoring mandatory environmental reviews. The hush in the courtroom was palpable. Even Valerie's confident smirk faltered. Judge Martinez peered over her glasses at the stack of documents. Are we to understand that a sitting county supervisor received direct payments from an entity tied to Seaside Grove's project? Valerie's lead attorney cleared his throat. We have no official link confirming the LLC belongs to Seaside Grove. It's circumstantial. Before he could continue, the door at the back of the courtroom banged open. Supervisor Parker himself stumbled in, looking disheveled. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Parker approached the defense table, whispering frantically to Valerie. She shot him a glare that said, "You should have stayed away." After a tense moment, Parker requested to address the court. Judge Martinez allowed it, though her expression was wary. Parker stood, tugging at his tie. I want to clarify. Those wire transfers were personal loans. They had nothing to do with the HOA. The judge arched an eyebrow. You expect us to believe these loans coincidentally coincide with your signing of the rezoning permits? Parker stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. It's a misunderstanding, I promise. The judge paused. I will be referring this matter to the State Attorney General's office for a formal investigation. For now, we're here about the injunction. Ms. Wynn, do you have anything else to add? Valerie rose, trying to salvage the situation. She claimed they had followed the county's guidelines, that any wrongdoing was Parker's fault, not the HOA's. But the damage was done. Judge Martinez ordered an immediate temporary cease and desist on all construction. A wave of relief washed over me. As the gavel fell, Valerie locked eyes with me, her gaze brimming with fury. She knew I'd orchestrated this takedown, yet the true fight had only begun. The final verdict on dismantling the project would come later, but for now, the bulldozers would fall silent. The post-hearing atmosphere was electric. Media swarmed Parker, who slipped out a side door. Valerie refused to speak to reporters, marching off with her lawyers. Meanwhile, I gave a brief statement, praising Judge Martinez's order and reaffirming my commitment to halt any unlawful development. The next day, Parker resigned as supervisor. Word spread that a grand jury might indict him for bribery and fraud. Valerie tried to distance herself from him, claiming the HOA was an innocent party, but public opinion had turned. Local commentators lambasted Seaside Grove for ignoring environmental laws. Back at my beach house, the roar of construction had ceased. The silence felt surreal after weeks of noise. Workers had packed up their equipment, A security guard was posted at the half-finished villas to prevent vandalism, but otherwise, the site lay dormant. One evening, as I strolled along the shore, taking in the crash of waves, a figure approached me, someone I didn't recognize at first. She wore a hooded jacket, her face partially concealed. "Mr. Callahan?" she asked quietly. "I'm the one who called you about the Shoreline Investments file." I studied her face in the fading light. She looked to be in her late 20s, with worry etched into her features. "You work at the county offices?" I ventured. She nodded. "My name's Angela. I handle digital archiving. I found the suspicious documents linking Parker and the HOA. I couldn't stand by and watch them destroy the coast for profit." Emotion swelled in my chest. "Thank you, Angela. Your tip was crucial. Are you safe?" She glanced over her shoulder. "I've already received threats. I might lose my job." I placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "If anyone retaliates, call me immediately. I'll ensure you're protected. You did the right thing." Angela offered a faint smile, then disappeared into the darkness. I was left there, feeling immense gratitude and a surge of responsibility. People like Angela had risked everything to expose the HOA's corruption. I had to see this through, no matter the cost. Over the following weeks, the investigation into Parker and the HOA snowballed. More whistleblowers came forward, revealing how Valerie's organization had pressured local homeowners, manipulated property lines, and even threatened lawsuits against neighbors who opposed them. Laura and I worked tirelessly, compiling affidavits, analyzing financial records. The cease and desist order was extended by Judge Martinez, effectively paralyzing the entire project. Many of the investors behind Seaside Grove started pulling out, not wanting to be linked to a scandal. Parker was indicted on multiple counts, facing possible jail time. Valerie Nguyen, once so poised and unshakable, found herself under scrutiny for potential conspiracy and fraud. She lawyered up, but rumor had it she was running low on resources. Her dream of 60 villas on my coastal sanctuary had become a financial and legal nightmare. One final hearing remained, determining the fate of the partially constructed villas. The HOA argued that destroying the buildings would cause economic harm. We countered that they were built illegally in a protected zone without proper permits. The public tension was palpable. Some demanded restoration of the dunes, others wanted the structures converted for public use. On the day of the hearing, Judge Martinez reviewed all evidence, including new testimony from the Coastal Commission about the environmental harm. After careful deliberation, she delivered a ruling that would resonate up and down the California coast. The land illegally rezoned must be returned to its natural state. The incomplete villas, each one a symbol of unscrupulous development, were to be demolished at the HOA's expense. Valerie and her board members faced hefty fines for ignoring environmental regulations. The courtroom erupted in a mix of cheers and gasps. Valerie sat stunned, her face ashen. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Justice, for once, had prevailed decisively. Reporters clamored for my reaction as I left the courthouse, but I simply said, "The law must protect our coastlines and our citizens. No one is above it, no matter how much money or power they claim to have." In the months that followed, the construction site was dismantled, piece by piece. Bulldozers reversed their roles. Instead of tearing down dunes, they carted away the steel skeletons of half-built villas. Environmental restoration teams arrived to rehabilitate the fragile shoreline. Over time, native grasses and dune vegetation began to reclaim the scarred landscape. Valerie Nguyen, resigned from the Seaside Grove HOA in disgrace. Her new attorneys tried to shield her from civil lawsuits, but she faced significant liabilities. Rumor had it she might declare bankruptcy. Supervisor Parker was found guilty of corruption and sentenced to prison, sending a strong message to other officials who might consider similar misdeeds. Meanwhile, I took it upon myself to ensure that the public would benefit from the site once the land recovered. I coordinated with state environmental groups, local colleges, and volunteers to create a protected coastal preserve. Informational signs were installed to teach visitors about dune ecology and the importance of conservation. On a bright Saturday morning, we held a small ceremony on the beach to celebrate the preserve's inauguration. Neighbors, local officials, and the media attended. My mother stood by my side, tears of pride in her eyes. Laura Pike, beaming, congratulated me on the successful legal battles. Even Angela from the county archives came, quietly mingling in the background. When it was my turn to speak, I addressed the crowd, voice resonating with conviction. This sanctuary isn't just my family's inheritance. It belongs to every one of us who believes in protecting the beauty of our coastline. We faced greed and corruption. We pushed back, and we succeeded. May this shore serve as a reminder that our natural treasures are worth fighting for. Applause mingled with the roar of the surf. Gulls circled overhead. The crisp salt air felt like a promise of renewal. I closed my eyes, imagining my grandfather's approving nod. In the end, the sanctuary stood as living proof that no matter how powerful a group might seem, justice can triumph, especially when the cause is righteous and the will to fight is unwavering. And if you found hope or inspiration in this tale, please share it, subscribe for more stories of legal showdowns and moral victories, and help spread the message that some things, like our coasts, are simply too precious to lose.